Blog Talk Radio.
You're about to hear a revolution in talk radio, Liberty Talk Radio, where the critical thinking will defrag your mind of propaganda-ridden viruses induced by mass media news programming. No BS here, just the facts.
And now we present to you America's quintessential iconoclastic anomaly. Wow. In talk radio, your host, Joe Cristiano.
Welcome, everyone, to Liberty Talk Radio, America's libertarian voice, broadcasting from our studio in Tulsa, Oklahoma, to around the world. I'm your host, Joe Cristiano, and this is your antidote to popular talk radio. This broadcast is being brought to you live on Thursday morning, February 12th, 2015. It is now about 8:01 a.m. Central Time in what was once known as the good old USA. Folks, it's time for us to take back control of our government now before this bureaucratic, oversized, and self-serving federal government starves us of our property, our freedom, our rights, and our liberty. But to do this, we must shed conventional thinking regarding our political structure. We need to be revolutionaries in thought, dissidents in action. Only after we recognize what our government is doing to our freedom and our Constitution will we start taking it back. And this program is just about that. During our live broadcast, we invite you to call 646-652-4620 or toll free 888-773-4496. Before we get started, I'd like to remind our listeners to visit our website and click on the subscribe icon. You'll be notified of our upcoming broadcast. We do not sell your name in any way, shape, or form. It's kept in-house only. For those of you who tweet, our Twitter address is @LibertyJoe. And now, on to our show. Well, good morning, everyone. This morning, we have as our guest, coming on in about 5 minutes or so, Jacob Hornberger. He is the president and founder of the Future of Freedom Foundation. Jacob is probably one of the America's quintessential, he's a libertarian, but a real advocate for freedom. He's very well known. In the interest of full disclosure, I will admit that I financially support his or donate to his cause, together with many others. And Jacob will be with us, and today's conversation will be centered around immigration. And the reason why I picked that subject is because of the major issues which divide America today. Let's say the war on terror. There's people on both sides of the fence there. The war on drugs, very controversial, But immigration not only is controversial, but also is so misunderstood. There seems to be a chasm between government telling us where to go, who to associate with, and what to do with it, and then tax the hell out of it, versus the law of free association. Folks, if we go back to the founding fathers' time, when they constructed, they wanted the Articles of Confederation. They wanted a federation of states. They really didn't want a constitution as we have it today. It got sort of shoved down their throat in a very diplomatic way, in a sneaky way, but we wound up with a constitution. And the Bill of Rights was designed as a double check on government because they didn't even trust the Constitution. They said, no, we want to make sure we are explicit in everything, that the government does nothing, that the people run the country, the government just makes certain that everyone plays by the rule. Well, you know what happened to that particular philosophy. It's out the window. We're just like Russia or Europe or any other country today. We are, I guess, what you call a socialistic oligarchy. But with that comes the principle that is no longer abided by, and that is the principle of free association. We don't have that association today. I cannot associate with everyone and anyone that I want. I need permission from the government. Sure, I can speak to my neighbor, because they live in my subdivision. I can speak to someone in Oklahoma or maybe even Kansas or Texas, But as soon as I cross that imaginary politically derived line between Mexico and the United States or between the United States and Cuba, I need permission from the government. And in most cases, I will not receive that. Why? Really, no one understands. I mean, we say there's embargoes, they're enemies of the state and whatever. Quite frankly, folks, a lot of people don't like me. I have to admit. I mean, I wish the world loves me. The world doesn't love me. Not everyone does. But I have no enemies. There's no one that I hate. There's no one that I dislike. There's no one that I do not want to be friends with. Now, if we took that very principle, the principle of free association, and we truly understood what that meant, and which is embedded in our natural law within our Constitution, we would say that everything that the government is doing, telling us, and restricting us from doing is absolutely illegal. Forget about unconstitutional. Forget about the Constitution altogether. It's illegal. It's against the law of nature. But we don't learn things like the freedom of association in school. In fact, we're void of that. In fact, if we took a survey, the man on the street survey, and said, all right, tell us, what is your opinion of the principle of free association? You would get a blank stare 10 out of 10 times. And yet that freedom of association is the very bedrock of our freedom, which we have totally lost. And that's why this program exists. That's why the Future of Freedom Foundation exists. I encourage everyone to go to fff.org. And subscribe. And please do give a little bit of donation. You don't have to give a lot of money, but give, I know Jacob Hornberger will be on here saying, no, we want a lot of money. but I'm just seriously, but really subscribe to them, read their articles, and if you really feel it's worth it, do in fact become a financial supporter of that. Now, we don't have financial supporters of our program. This is a freebie, We bear the cost of everything, and of course we have a couple of advertisers that help defer the cost of this program. This will be the very first broadcast in which we will have our guest videotaped, and it will be live, and we will split screen. I'll be on one half of the screen, and our guest will be on the other. Now, this is the first time we're doing this. We just hope it works. If you saw the number of wires that were connected to all the equipment we have here, it'd make your head spin. God forbid that I was asked to do this myself and I didn't have help. Never would happen. Nothing would turn on. But we hope everything works, and we think Jacob should be calling in any second. Now, is he in yet? He is not called in yet. Now I'm getting very concerned. We have a call here. Let me see who's on the line.
No, he's on the air.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello. Jacob?
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Yeah, can you hear me?
You've called into the toll-free number. I think, hold on a second, let me ask the technician. Was he supposed to dial in to Starve the Beast, right? You need to call in, dial in to Skype, and type in Starve the Beast. And then that will bring you right into our program. Okay? Because right now you are on audio, but you're not on video.
So what do I call? What number?
Don't call the number. Just go on Skype and type in Starve the Beast. And you'll be connected via audio and video as well.
Okay. I'll try.
Okay? All right.
You.
Thank you. All right, a little confusion there. We expect that confusion to exist because this is all new. Maybe the instructions are not very clear, but I want you to know that we're going to get this thing ironed out, and soon we'll be lickety-slick. I tell you, NBC, CBS, ABC, watch out, here we come. All right. Also, we're under negotiations with a local radio station in which we're going to go integrate our program on a commercial broadcast. We should know something about that within the next week or two. We're really excited about that as well. On Monday, just for your information, we hope to have as a guest one of the producers of the producer of the film Atlas Shrugged, and I think we will have him on Monday morning. I'm confirming that today. So it'll be Monday morning, 8 o'clock. And we're going to try to broadcast every Monday at 8 and Thursday at 8, between 8 and 9, twice a week. That's about all I can fit in right now, but we may expand that later on. All right, let's see if, is he in yet? Okay, I think we have a connection. My technician will tell me exactly when to start.
Okay, well, I'm here.
Okay, very good. Jacob, now, he's not showing up on the screen. Do you know why? Here we go. There you go, Jacob. I can see your face. Now,
Awesome.
you're not centered. It may be us. Is that us? Excuse me? Okay, there you go. Okay, Jacob, thank you so much for being on Liberty Talk Radio. It is a privilege and an honor, and I truly mean that. I already gave your introduction. You probably heard it. You are one of America's leading advocates for liberty, and I encourage everyone to go to fff.org and subscribe to your website, and of course financially support the cause, because the cause is for everyone. So thank you so much for being on our show.
Oh, the feeling is mutual. Thank you, Joe.
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about the immigration issue, and let me give you my logic behind it. If we took some of the most divisive issues in America today, and that would include the war on terror, it would include the war on drugs, and the immigration issue. Of those three, and they may be the top three depending on what your perspective is, I think the war on, I guess you can call it the war on immigration. The war on immigration is probably the most misunderstood, and probably because people have no concept or no realization, have never even heard of the concept of free association and natural law, and how government has no right to restrict me from speaking to anyone around the world or going anywhere around the world. So that was my logic. But I think you can articulate the immigration issue infinitely better than I can. Could you convince our listeners, please, that open borders is the right way to go?
Well, that's absolutely true. You know, Joe, I've grown up around this issue all my life. I mean, I grew up in Laredo, Texas, which is on the border. Yeah. And I've seen these paroxysms of anxiety about the immigrants are coming to invade America and steal our jobs and all the other bromides that we hear. And it's very kind of amusing to me because it never goes away. And that's because the system that is in place is really a socialist system. The system of central planning, in which government commissars decide how many immigrants are going to be allotted to each country, what their qualifications are going to be, what types of immigrants, what their education is going to be. I mean, this is central planning in its purest form. So the point is that no matter what they do, no matter what reform they advocate, no matter what reform they adopt, you're still going to have this crisis. And so every time I see this thing pop up in the news, every 5 years or so, I just laugh because we've been telling people this will never work. Socialism cannot work. It doesn't matter what reform you adopt, you're going to still have your paroxysms of anxiety. There's only one thing that works, Joe, and that's the free market.
Right.
Nothing else will work. Right. And what does that free market mean? It means the free movements of goods and people across borders, the same way we have domestically between the states. It's the only thing that works. So when people say, you libertarians are just not very practical, actually, we're the only practical people because we're the only ones that advocate a solution that works. And that's, as you enunciated, the exercise of fundamental God-given rights, the right to associate with people, to enter into contracts with people, to sustain your life through labor, by going to work for people that want to hire you. It's the only thing that harmonizes human interests and that is consistent with natural God-given rights.
Yeah. You know what's interesting is that every time someone runs for office, they mention the immigration issue. And when they do so, they say, I'm going to be tough on immigration. But that's all they say. They just say, what does that tough on immigration mean? And then nothing happens. We may build another 20 feet of a wall or something. And I've seen pictures of the wall that have separated some of the towns, where the imaginary political dividing line is. It's horrible. It took a beautiful town and it split it in half, and made a slum out of it, actually. And I don't see how defacing the earth, we can say we're proud of that and we should do more of it. What I can't fix in my own head, if I was a terrorist and wanted to get into the United States, all I would have to do is let me off in the Gulf of Mexico, put me on a little speedboat. Don't even bring me to the shore, because I used to live down in Houston. I used to go to Galveston. It's very shallow water. I mean, I can walk for half a mile, basically, onto a beach, and I'm in America. There's no cops there. There's no border patrol. I mean, I can unload I can have people on the beach help me unload all of my bombs or whatever I'm carrying with me, you know. And how do you protect yourself? We have over $9,000 miles worth of borders. How do we support ourselves? We can lock up the border between Mexico and the United States, and yet we still have another 7,000 miles to go. What are we going to do? Encase ourselves in a bubble? I don't understand it.
Well, that's why it was interesting. And when you raised the other two issues, the drug war and the war on terrorism, I mean, they actually interlink in all this, because the U.S. foreign policy, where they're killing people overseas through sanctions, through embargoes, through bombs, through assassination, I mean, that's what creates the anger and the hatred that cause people to want to come over here and do harm. So if you dismantle that whole imperialist thing, you immediately end any threat of terrorism against the American people. And so you don't have this fear of, oh my gosh, they're coming to get us. But as you point out, if somebody wants to come and do harm, there's no way you're going to be able to keep them out. I mean, we see that with drugs. Drugs, they get across the border despite this little police state they have along the border. That Berlin fence, which is what I call it, that was supposed to solve all the problems. And of course, obviously it hasn't, because we're back in an immigration crisis. And they've turned the whole border into a police state. I mean, they actually have checkpoints, believe it or not. When you're leaving like Laredo, 40 miles north of the border, you're subject to a complete search. North of the border, even though you've never gone into Mexico. And then in Arizona and states around there, you have east-west checkpoints where people are just traveling along a highway and they encounter a police, an immigration checkpoint, just like in the old Soviet Union, just like in Cuba and North Korea.
Right. Yeah.
It's incredible.
Yeah, and it's amazing how people can't see what we used to view in the movies 30 and 40 years ago and were absolutely appalled by it, and we're doing it today, and yet we applaud it. I go, wait a minute. You want to watch an old movie? Tell me if you applaud that. But they don't want to see the connection. It's like a belief system. It's like a religion, you know? You believe something, whether it be true or not, and if someone says, well, maybe not, let me give you another explanation, and all of a sudden you have a fight on your hands. No one wants to listen. It becomes a religion, and politics have become a belief system or a religion, and you can't fight that. You have to do it very slowly, I guess, where someone actually has wakes up. You know, they have that moment where they go, oh my goodness gracious, where was my brain all these years? It amazes me that when we say we're going to secure the border, no one can tell me what that means. I mean, they can't. They say, well, we're going to secure the border. He said, what do you mean by that? Well, we're going to stop all the drugs from coming. I said, well, why don't we stop financing the war on drugs? We're financing them. If I'm financing somebody, I want to see them thrive. You know, if I'm financing something, I want to make a kickback on it. I want to make money. I'm a businessman. If I give you $500,000, I better get my money back within 2 years and make a heck of a lot of money. The war on drugs is no different. Did you see it that way, or am I maybe skewed in my thinking?
Oh, it's just another example of a federal program which is a total disaster. As we libertarians have been saying, Milton Friedman said it, 30, 40 years ago in an open letter to Bill Bennett, the drug czar at that time. It's time to end this thing. Legalize the drugs, have a free market in the sale and distribution and possession of illicit drugs, the way our ancestors did here in America. Because when you make something illegal like this, it creates an enormous black market price, which then causes more people to start saying, hey, I can make a quick buck here. And so it never really stops. All you do is have this endless machine of putting people into jail. and with no positive benefit whatsoever. I mean, there's more drugs than ever before and more ruined lives, and you got police corruption, you've got all the adverse effects, drug gangs, gang lords, all of whom would be put out of business immediately if you ended this thing.
Yeah.
And that's really the cause, or one of the principal causes, why the children of all those immigrants started flooding across American borders several months ago, because they're getting killed by drug lords, or they're getting conscripted by drug lords. So here you have this integration between the drug war and the war on immigrants. It's all sort of fits together. And this is where, as you suggested, people need to have that aha moment. It's not something we can cram into their brain. They got to come to it on their own. We can share ideas, but like the old adage says, you can't make a horse drink water. You can just lead him there.
Right.
But that aha moment is what you and I and so many others are experiencing, of saying, look, it's government programs, socialist programs, interventionist programs that are at the root of virtually all of America's woes. And the only solution is to return to the founding principles of this country of individual liberty, free markets, limited government, a constitutional republic.
Yeah. Maybe through your efforts, the United States will have an epiphany, and maybe we can credit you with that. You know,
well, it wouldn't just be me. I mean, there's lots of us out here promoting these ideas. And it's a burgeoning movement, as you know. It's very exciting.
It is. Right.
A lot of people are now self-describing as libertarians, and the label really doesn't matter. It's the principles that matter. You know, somebody can call himself a conservative or a progressive or a liberal or whatever, but as long as he's starting to realize, hey, the founding principles of this country were free markets. I mean, that's why we have free movements of goods and people across state borders. It didn't have to be that way, Joe. The founding fathers and the framers could have said each state shall be able to have immigration and trade restrictions against the other states. Right. And the greatest thing in the world, we have the greatest free movements of people, free movements of goods zone in history. It's part of the reason for our prosperity. We just need to translate that to international borders. Same principle. People come. They don't have to become citizens. They can come to tour, visit, interact with people, open businesses even, work for people, retain their citizenship. What's the problem? Yeah.
I'm gonna take a boat. I'm gonna buy a boat. I'm gonna go out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and I'm gonna declare the Pacific Ocean Cristiano land. All right? And it's mine. Now, I'm going to draw the borders. I mean, I'll allow everyone a 10-mile limit, okay, outside. But other than that, it's mine. If you come over there, now you need my permission. Now, that sounds silly. It's stupid. But that's exactly what we're doing. What's the difference between me floating around in a boat in the middle of the Pacific Ocean and me saying, now, this is all mine. This is Cristiano land. Oh, you need papers to come across. We don't do that on the water. Why would we do that on the land?
Well, it's important to point out, though, that people, that just because you have open borders doesn't mean that people are free to trespass onto private property.
Right.
I mean, you also often hear the statists say this, saying, well, you would let anybody into your home. Yeah. Well, of course not. But a home is private property. What we're talking about is the right of people to move here and buy a home or rent a home or go to work for a private business. Notice that you don't see immigrants sleeping on streets or public parks or whatever. They come over, they find a private establishment to live in, they find a job to work at. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about intruding on somebody's private property rights. That would be a violation of liberty. But otherwise, open the borders to the free movements of people. It's the only thing that's going to work.
Well, how do you respond when people say, but we're a sovereign nation, we just can't have people coming here? I mean, we're a sovereign nation. I mean, there's a border, and we have to protect those borders. And then they extrapolate it down the road. They get worse, as it goes on. But the light duty part of it is that we have a border, and we should protect our borders from outside invasion or intrusion, if you will. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, the other thing they often say is, you want borders to disappear. Borders will just disappear. Well, that's ridiculous. Simply because you have the right of people to cross borders doesn't mean borders disappear. Right. It means a border's there and you're just crossing it.
Right.
And on your sovereignty point, I mean, right now there's, untold numbers of people that go from Maryland into Virginia and untold numbers of people that go from Virginia into Maryland. Neither state loses its sovereignty. When you cross the border, you become subject to the laws of that state.
That's right.
And that's the same thing that works in countries. You know, all these dire predictions that sovereignty would disappear and borders would disappear was made with respect to the EU countries. It used to be the same thing there. You had these strict restrictions. You know, Italians could not go into France and get jobs without permission and so forth. And we libertarians were saying, open the borders. And they were saying, oh, sovereignty and borders. Today, anybody from Italy can go into France freely, get a job. He retains his Italian citizenship. France didn't disappear. Italy didn't disappear. The borders didn't disappear. It's just people crossing borders, pursuing happiness in their own way, working at whatever jobs, learning whatever languages they want without the interference of the government. It's been fantastic for people in the EU. Free movements of people across borders.
You know, I was in Europe once. A couple of times I went to Europe. I'm a bad traveler. You never want to travel with me because I complain all the way there, while I'm there, and all the way back. You know, and a week afterwards, I'm still complaining. I don't travel well. So leave me home, by the way. Okay, just for personal information. I was in. I guess I was in Switzerland at the time or France, and I'm not sure. I really wouldn't. But I was on the street, and it was a neighborhood, you know, with the typical European apartment buildings, you know. And I'm on a street corner, and there's a stump, a concrete stump, and I'm looking at it, and I have no idea what it's there, but on one side it had a F, you know, engraved in it, and on the other side it had an S. And I'm looking at it, and I couldn't figure out what the heck that meant, you know. And so I asked somebody, I said, what is that? They said, oh, that side's France, that side's Switzerland. And I looked, and I said, but there was no lines, no white lines, no gates, nothing. I mean, people walking in and out, cars were going just like they were going from Kansas to Missouri or Oklahoma, yeah, wherever. And I said, where's the border patrol? Where's the passports? There was nothing at all. I mean, it made no difference. And I said, why can't we be that way? How come there's not panic in the streets here? Why is there all sorts of, where are the tanks? I want to see the tanks. There was no tanks there. And it just, I never forget that. It's just absolutely unbelievable. You see nothing. I mean, it was just like a street in the middle of the city.
Well, and it was actually like that here in the United States. I mean, we often tend to forget how different our ancestors were compared to Americans of today. Yeah. Throughout the 19th century, there was open borders here in the United States. I mean, there was a little inspection sticker for tuberculosis or infectious diseases at Ellis Island. But other than that, as long as you were well, no questions asked, you could flood into America, and they were flooding into America, many of whom couldn't even speak English. On the southwest, on the Mexican border, after the United States absorbed the entire northern half of Mexico, I mean, imagine, they took over the entire northern half of the country, including the people in that country. Yeah. The borders remained open. Mexicans could freely cross into what had been their country, open businesses, interact with people, conduct business, engage in jobs. It was just a total open border, no immigration controls, and nobody cared.
That's right.
It was like, you retain your citizenship, we retain our citizenship, we just interact. And notice, Joe, that today, when you interact with people today, you don't really know who's an immigrant and who isn't. I mean, you don't go and say, can I ask for your papers? Can I see if you're an American? Nobody does that.
Right.
You may suspect it when you walk into McDonald's and you hear people speaking Spanish, but nobody says, I want to know that you're an American. So if you open the borders, you really wouldn't know whether you were dealing with an American or a foreigner. Like, who cares?
Yeah. Yeah, I was in San Diego about 6 years ago, and I was in a hotel, and they had this room which they served free breakfast. You know, they give you free breakfast in the morning, coffee and rolls and stuff. And what was interesting is I walked in, and I didn't understand one person speaking. I mean, they all spoke in foreign language, and I just assumed since we were just a few miles away from the Mexican border, they were all from Mexico, you know. And I just sat there, had my coffee, and I sort of enjoyed it because I didn't say anything. And they were so friendly. They were talking. They were really animated when they were talking. I said, well, this is typical Mexican, you know, type thing. And then I listened for a while, and it wasn't Mexican. They were French Canadians, every one of them. There was a motorcycle group that motorcycled. I'm a motorcycle guy myself, by the way. I rode my G650 yesterday. But came down and they were touring the United States. And they all wound up in this hotel. And when you went outside, you saw a map of just of motorcycles. And I realized then they were all speaking French. Now, I thought, the first thing I thought to myself, if I was the typical American, I would have been upset. Like, how dare they speak French Canadian, when they were from Quebec. And I thought it was terrific that here they are speaking their language in America the way they want. And I thought that was the neatest thing in the world. And I actually felt good about it. And I said, well, why can't we feel good about people coming to America? Why do they have to be like us? And God forbid they're like us. We don't want them. We don't want to spoil them, make them less than what they are. But I guess my attitude is so different than the average American. It almost scares me,
Well, your attitude is what the founding mindset was in this country. I mean, your mindset is the same as my mindset, which was the mindset of the American people throughout the 19th century. There was a cosmopolitan mindset involved. I mean, I feel the same way you do. Growing up on the border, people have no idea how different border culture is. I did an informal survey a while back when I returned to Laredo, and I walked around the McDonald's, and I just went from table to table to see whether they were speaking English or Spanish. And about 99% of the tables were speaking Spanish. And it was like, wow, this would drive statists crazy, like, oh my gosh, deport them. Well, you can't deport them because they're American citizens living here in the United States. And yeah, you've got people don't realize this. You've got more than 1 million Americans that have retired in Mexico. And I read an article that said very few of them learn Spanish. They don't assimilate. They hang out amongst each other. They still root for American sports teams, and they retain their American citizenship. And I say, great. What's wrong with that? Yeah. Why shouldn't people just be free to pursue happiness in their own way? Yeah. And that, to me, is what life's all about. Yeah. Pursuing happiness in your own way.
Yeah. What I find particularly interesting is whenever I hear someone travel overseas, especially to a country that's uncommon, Armenia or Kazakhstan or someplace, I mean, not the typical Paris or London, and you ask them, how are the people there? What is always the response? It's always, they're so warm. They took me in. They were just so gracious. I have never heard once in my life, and in 2 months I'll be 72 years old. You can send me a gift. But in 2 months, now in 72 years, I have never heard anyone say, well, I went to Qatar, or I went to Russia, or I went to India, and the people were nasty. No one was nice. They all tell me how wonderful, how warm they are. They take them in. They gave them lodging. The food was terrific. And they become like family immediately. But however, when we return here, those same people we have to be very suspicious of, because God forbid they go over our border, they can hurt us. And that dichotomy has always struck me as being the antithesis of really the way we're supposed to be thinking in the first place.
That's a great point. I don't think I've really thought about that before. That's an absolutely awesome point. And now there are parts of the world, as you know, that Americans are hated. And like in the Middle East, and that's because of the U.S. government, the empire, the militarism over there, the bombs, the interventionism, the support of brutal dictators. And so when we talk about dismantling that imperial machine, the statists say, oh, you're an isolationist. Right. Well, that's ridiculous, because what they want to do is they want to unleash the military forces of the United States to go and stomp all over the world and then isolate the private sector with immigration controls, and trade restrictions. Yeah. We want to do the opposite. Yeah. We want to unleash the private sector because, as you point out, the private sector of Americans, we're the greatest diplomats of the country. The worst diplomats are the people in the State Department, the people in the Pentagon, and the people in the CIA. Right. But people love Americans. They just hate what this government's doing to people overseas. Yeah. Yeah, when people say, well, we have to close the borders to stop the influx of drugs, I said, well, we can stop the influx of drugs if we stop financing the business.
right? And then when people say, well, we have to secure the borders to protect ourselves from people harming us, terrorists, I said, fine. All we have to do is stop bombing them. People don't, I want to think myself as the absolutely quintessential perfect person. In the millions of years that man has been on the planet Earth, I am the most perfect person in the world. I want to think that, Unfortunately, quite frankly, I don't think that's the truth. I think I have a few flaws. But we think that way, that we're perfect, everyone around us is imperfect, so we have to protect what we have. And it's such a immature, ignorant mentality that, quite frankly, I don't want to be part of. It embarrasses me to say I'm an American if that's the way we think.
Well, that's right. I mean, but that is not what an American is. If you look at our heritage, an American is a person that believes in individual liberty, freedom of association, liberty of contract, the pursuit of happiness. I mean, these are the principles that Jefferson enunciated in the Declaration of Independence. It's the statism that the statists have put into our country with all this militarism and empire and bombing and assassinating. That's the real root of the problem here. And then they use that as the excuse to say, oh, well, we have to protect you from these threats that we're producing by erecting these Berlin fences and making police states across the border and putting people into jail for traveling to Cuba, Americans into jail. And I'll mention another European country, though, is Switzerland. I mean, Switzerland has a kind of foreign policy that America was founded on. The founding fathers looked at Switzerland and they modeled the foreign policy on it with no big standing military establishment, no going abroad in search of monsters to destroy. In other words, limiting your country to defense. And that's what the Swiss do. Nobody bothers them. There's no terrorist attacks. There's no invasions, occupations, because everybody in Switzerland's well armed. They have assault rifles in their weapons and assault weapons in their homes, and they are well trained to report to duty if anybody ever jacks with them. And that really is the model for America. Bring the troops home. Let's make the Department of Defense real defense,
right, instead
of this imperialism.
Yeah. Well, Jacob, if we can just by the way, folks, we don't have anybody calling in. I don't know why we don't have anyone calling in. Maybe because we haven't encouraged them to do so. We're going to take a quick break. But after a break, please, we encourage you to call in 646-652-4620, 646-652-4620, or toll free 888-773-4496. Just don't go away. Break will just be 1 minute, please.
You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Political talk derived from a historical perspective. Not always palatable, but good food for thought. Pure libertarian talk with host Joe Cristiano. LibertyTalkRadio.com.
Express Test is your go-to company for on-site occupational health testing services. That's right, we said on-site. That means we will meet you at your facility for a free health and occupational safety consultation. Express Test specializes in hearing conservation, respiratory protection, and employee safety. We can help you establish viable programs tailored to your business and employee needs. For your free consultation, call 918-743-2929 or visit us at expresstest.com. That's 918-743-2929 or expresstest.com. Do you find yourself asking, what did you say? Aaron Cristiano of Ranch Acres Audiology has over 25 years of experience helping patients just like you.
Hearing requires conservation. We need to be aware and we need to be responsible for our own hearing health.
Understand more with a little help from Ranch Acres Audiology. Call 918-749-7711. That's 918-749-7711 to learn more. We'd like to thank attorney Constance Squires for her support of Liberty Talk Radio. If you want a comprehensive way to affordably avoid legal issues, call Constance Squires. For a free consultation, call 918-254-9283 or go online at isthyWillDone.com.
This isn't your typical talk radio show. This is Liberty. Liberty Talk Radio.
Folks, we're back. This is Joe Cristiano. You're listening to Liberty Talk Radio. On the line, we have as our guest Jacob Hornberger, the president and founder of the Future of Freedom Foundation. He is probably America's quintessential cheerleader for liberty. And we're talking about the immigration issue. I don't see him he's on the phone. Okay, all right. Please call toll-free 888-773-4496 or direct 646-652-4620 with any questions or comments. You will not be interrupting us. We'd like to hear from you. Please do so. Okay, Jacob, are you there? Is he there?
I am.
Okay.
I am.
I don't see you on the screen.
I see you.
You can see me, right? I can't see
Yeah.
you. That's not fair. You know that. Okay, I think here we come. All right. This is all new to us. By the way, you are our experiment. You know that. Here we go. You are our experiment because this is the very first time we split screen an entire broadcast, and it took a lot to get here. When I first opened the studio, when I was with 1170 KFAQ and I canceled the contract with them for a while, I said, we may be going back, by the way, but someone said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm busy. I have businesses. I'm busy 24 hours a day. I said, but I'll open my own studio. And they said, well, how are you going to do that? I said, I have no idea. They said, what do you know about opening a studio? I said, nothing. They said, you're just going to do it? I said, yeah, I'll find out when I get there. And let me tell you something. If I knew how much work it was going to be, I would never have done it. But here we are, and I'm really glad we have, because I think this is working out beautifully. You're coming out clear. We have split screen, and hopefully in a month or so, we could be 4 people all at once. So we'll get maybe you and maybe Paul Jacobs and several other people all together, and we can have a conversation. So I'm looking forward to that. All right, let me ask you this question. When people look at they think of the United States and Mexico, they draw in their mind this line, and of course they some may even think of a wall or fences or whatever. How would you suggest that we protect our sovereignty, if that's all and that important, and how would you allow people from other countries to enter the United States? What would the parameters be from your perspective?
Well, imagine getting on a flight here in Washington Dulles Airport here in Virginia, and you go in and you check in, you get on the flight. Too bad there's the TSA there, and then you fly into San Francisco. Let's say you go get your luggage, and you proceed to your rent car, and you go about your business. That's what I envision with international relations. Somebody from a foreign country flies into an airport of the United States. He picks up his luggage like any normal human being. He goes about his business. Or he travels across a bridge, just like we cross the bridge between Maryland and Virginia. We cross a bridge between Mexico and the United States freely, where there's no guards, there's no tax collectors, there's no gendarmes, there's no border patrol. There's none of that police state activity. That's what open borders are. They're just free movements of people across borders. Nobody changes their citizenship. I mean, in a very easy sense for people to envision, think about tourism. Suppose all of a sudden America's got flooded with tourists, summer coming here on summer vacation. Who would care? I mean, okay, some motels may get filled up in Disney World. You got to accommodate. You got to make some reservations earlier or whatever. But I guarantee you, the private businesses never complain about too many customers. You know, that, oh my gosh, we have too many immigrants coming into Disney World. I mean, I've never heard that before. You know?
Jacob, we have a couple of people on the line. One's been holding for a little while. Let's see if we can get this person on the line. Caller, you're on the air. Exchange 319. Your first name and where you're calling from, please.
Joe?
Yes.
Yep. Yeah, this is Lloyd.
Lloyd, thank you very much for calling.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I'm out in the middle of the woods.
We can hear you.
Anyway.
Don't get lost.
Okay. Well, you know me. I like to boil things down. One of the biggest problem with the immigration is the fact that we've given our identity over to being a nation and individuals of a nation. And as long as we identify as being a nation, we're going to have to rely upon the government to enforce the borders. And the government is always just about as efficient at the borders as it is at any other government policy. Now, the thing of it is, because we rely upon this government, and this government has given social benefits to people that come in and such like that, that makes it a fraudulent argument because they're not coming, a lot of them do not come for work. But on the other hand, if you did not identify yourself as a nation and have that enforcement, the people that would come here would be coming here to work. And that would be the main reason.
Right.
In other words, we would have a free market in labor. In other words, capitalism.
That's it.
But if all property was owned by the private individuals instead of by the national government, as it's supposed to be by the Constitution, the only thing the government's supposed to own is forts, magazines, and the 10-mile square complex for the Capitol.
Right.
We wouldn't, then individuals would be doing the enforcement because it would be their land.
Right.
Now, you can keep these people, the people that come here to work, you can keep them out to try to protect your labor market and not have free market, or you can keep them out and then let our factories go overseas, and that's where the labor will be produced.
That's correct. And what's really interesting, Lloyd, is that America is aging, and we need young people, and the young people primarily are coming from south of the border. And another surprising statistic is more people are leaving the United States, going to Mexico, than coming from Mexico to the United States. And you never hear that. But you're right. And even if people owned property right on the border, there's always that public domain area, the streets, which are open to everyone. So the person would not be brought trespassing on your property. They would be taking a road that leads from Mexico to the States. And Jacob, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to emphasize that you don't lose your nationhood just because people are coming here to visit or work or tour, open up businesses. Like I said earlier, they can retain their citizenship or they can apply for a U.S. citizenship. Really doesn't matter. But the sovereignty does not abandon. As people are crossing borders, they're now subject to American law, regardless of the country they came from. Right. Now, he does raise an interesting point that I often hear, that he says, immigrants are coming here to get on welfare. Well, that's really not the case. That whenever you see these immigration raids, they're always on private businesses committing fraud in a sense, because illegal immigrants are not entitled to welfare. But we all, as libertarians, we object to the welfare state. But unlike statists, we don't use the welfare state as the excuse to expand violations on individual liberty. Once you reach the conclusion that people have natural God-given rights to cross borders, to sustain their lives, to pursue happiness, then you don't focus on them. You focus on getting rid of the immorality of the welfare state. It's better to get rid of the wrongdoing than to expand the wrongdoing by punishing people that simply want to come here and better their lives.
Right. Okay, Lloyd, thank you very much for calling out. I certainly appreciate you. Oh, he just left. He hung up. Okay, very good. Our other caller just hung up also. I guess maybe Lloyd had the same question Lloyd had. That's very good. All right, but we still have open lines, 646-652-4620 or 888-773-4496. Now, how do you address the objection saying, well, people come over here with all sorts of diseases, they'll infect everyone in the United States, so, they should have a full physical and they should have a passport and they should have a background check to make sure they're not drug dealers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. How do you respond to that?
Well, you can't have a perfectly safe world. And if you're trying to get a perfectly safe world and you're afraid of that, then you might as well stop Americans from traveling overseas. Because Americans go over to Africa and different countries and so forth. So we've tried to reach this balance that says, look, if a person is sick with like Ebola, if he's showing the signs that he's got this thing, it's perfectly legitimate for the government to quarantine that person. He is interfering with the rights of other people to live a life of happiness. Right. But as long as you're not showing those symptoms, We don't want that kind of police state. I mean, let's face it, domestically, people get sick. They have infectious illnesses domestically. We don't want that kind of system where the government's requiring before you go from Virginia to Maryland that you get a health inspection and you show your papers that you've got a health certificate. I mean, there's certain things about a free society. It's not perfectly safe, right. But freedom is what matters most of all, not the safety or security of individuals.
Well, how about anytime anyone gets sick, we send them to Mexico? Solves that problem, right?
Well, I don't think so.
I'm only kidding, Jake. Very unfair. I apologize. I know I will burn in hell for that. I know that. All right. But now, do you feel that there should be a checkpoint where people fill out an application that they're coming into the United States, where they're from, have a passport or anything like that? Or should they just be able to drive in their car or their carts or their motorcycles or walk or whatever and just walk from, let's say, Mexico or wherever to the United States, come here and then go back again without any checkpoint whatsoever?
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that, again, our American ancestors who really were so different. I mean, I really admire these people, that they didn't have passports. Throughout the 19th century, there were Americans that did not have passports. You wanted to go someplace, you just went. And so passports were more of a 20th century phenomenon. You don't need papers. I mean, this is the communist countries where you have to have papers around. And by the way, I mentioned those checkpoints along the border. Dark-skinned Americans, they have to carry their papers, their passport along the border. And I have friends and acquaintances from Laredo that, even though they don't go into Mexico, they're darker skinned, they're Mexican Americans. Some of them don't speak English. When they travel north, like on the bus, if they don't have their papers with them, they will be subject to arrest at that checkpoint. Right. So yeah, free movements of people, Joe, where you just pick up your luggage, you put it in your car, you cross the bridge. An example of this was when I was growing up there in Laredo. Laredo's like one great big metropolitan area with Nuevo Laredo, Mexico, and it's just separated by the Rio Grande. And every George Washington's birthday, Laredo would celebrate George Washington's birthday. We had probably the biggest celebration for his birthday in the country. We had a great big parade. We had a jalapeno festival. I mean, it was just a huge, like 3 or 4 day deal. Well, on the day of the parade, all the border guards were dismantled. There was open borders between the two cities. So people from Nuevo Laredo came over. They enjoyed the parade. They enjoyed the festivities. They would buy food. They would buy clothes in the clothing stores and whatever. And then, as soon as it was over, they would return home. Nobody was freaking out of, oh my gosh, they're crossing the border freely. And it really gave you a good example of how the people harmonize their interests when you don't have border controls in there. The cities don't fall into the ocean or into the Rio Grande just because people have the right to cross the border.
Yeah. But so much of this fear, from my perspective, is because we as a nation, our government, has become so intrusive, so negatively intrusive into other countries. We have created so many enemies that we need a tight border because all these people want to retaliate. And I don't blame them. If you punch me in the nose, I'm going to punch you back. And if we would, it just seems that it's all integrated. If we were truly a peaceful nation where we allowed for free association, we had a system of defense only and left everyone alone, no one from the hills of Afghanistan who can hardly has enough wherewithal to have food to eat that day is not saying, well, geez, how could I go to the United States and bomb the place? It's not going to happen. It's illogical. The whole thing is illogical. The only reason why we need a very, very strict and strong border patrol is because we are creating so many enemies. So it seems like the war on drugs, the war on terror, and immigration are all integrated. That's all one big problem. If we got rid of the war on terror, we got rid of the war on poverty, and we got rid of the war of offense, if you will, the Department of Offense, we wouldn't need any border patrol, and the world would be a more peaceful place. Now, there will be wars overseas. Not my problem. Now, what's your comment on that?
I would disagree with you to a certain extent. Even with all this imperialism, and I totally agree with you that this is the root cause of the anger and hatred against the United States, is this foreign imperialism, this militarism, the bombing, the killing, the sanctions, embargoes. I totally agree with that. But even with that, I would still argue that open borders would be the greatest thing you could ever do, because then you have your law enforcement personnel focusing on only that small sector of people that are coming to do us harm. So they wouldn't be diffusing their activities, monitoring and controlling tons of people, 99% of whom just want to come here and work.
Right.
You would instead take them all and hone them in on the people that are trying to get in to do us harm. And that's the way law enforcement is. And, law enforcement doesn't go and spy on everybody, or at least they're not supposed to. They figure out who it is that's committing the murders, the rapes, the burglaries, and they go after them. It's a much more efficient use of resources to go concentrate on the criminals rather than trying to monitor everybody, 99% of whom are not criminals.
Right. Well, if you read the books by Jim Rickards, for example, the Death of Money and Currency Crisis, the greatest situation that we have, the gravest situation we have now, is a possible collapse of our currency. If we didn't have the Border Patrol, we would be saving billions of dollars. Making that money would help pay down the debt, making our dollar stronger, making the whole country stronger, and generating more productivity internally, and reducing the amount of imperialism at the same time. We would become a stronger country, and we would possibly save the dollars at the same time.
Oh, there's no question that the welfare warfare state is taking this country down. I mean, we're spending much more money than we're bringing in, or the government is, and this is going to catch up. I mean, you can see the end of this road with Greece, that they're borrowing and spending this country into bankruptcy, and it's both the welfare state and the warfare state. And they're destroying money, but they've been doing that for decades. That the official money, as you know, Joe, established by the Constitution, and it had been the money of the American people for more than 100 years, was gold coins and silver coins. And they destroyed that in the 1930s under the Franklin Roosevelt administration. It was followed by the Nixon administration that went off the gold window. So we end up with these irredeemable paper notes that promise to pay nothing. And so it's just this massive decade after decade debasement of the money supply. So, that's what we libertarians are bringing to the table. We're asking people to question the entire statist paradigm that the statists have forced it onto our land. I wanted to ask you one thing before we sign off, though. Sure. You're in Texas, right?
No, Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Oh, you're in Tulsa. Okay. Well, for your Texas viewers, we've got a fantastic program that we're bringing to Austin, Texas, and which is still pretty close to Tulsa, on April 11th, Saturday, featuring Glenn Greenwald. Greenwald is a journalist through whom Edward Snowden leaked all the NSA documents. Ron Paul, everybody knows who Ron Paul is, and then Radley Balco, who's written this great book called Warrior Cops, columnist for the Washington Post, who's done fantastic about the militarization of police. It's going to be at the Lyndon Johnson Library, and those three speakers, I mean, it's the greatest lineup, one of the greatest lineups we've ever put together. And the cost for this program, $0. Wow. Free admission, because we've gotten a grant to fund it. And so if you're in that area of Austin, or even if you're not, this is a great opportunity to visit really one of the greatest cities in the United States.
Well, my wife lived in Austin, and she can't wait to go. We do plan to be there, so I guess I'll see you at that time. Now, before we sign off, would you like to just tell our audience more about the Future Freedom Foundation and how they can subscribe and or contact your organization?
Yeah, thank you very much for those nice things you said in the introduction. We're a nonprofit educational foundation. We do rely on donations, but we have a free publication that we send out every day. We carefully prepare it. It's like an editorial page for libertarianism. It takes the best articles from across the country in the mainstream press, libertarian organizations, and shares it with our viewers in terms of the best op-eds and editorials every morning from a libertarian perspective. That's the FFF Daily. That's free. And then we've got our monthly journal for $25 a year or $15 email version that consists of essays, deeper, more thought-provoking essays for people that want to explore libertarianism in more depth. So we'd love to have people just come by our website, see what we're doing. I write a daily blog 5 days a week. We've got new articles coming online every day, and we present this uncompromising moral, philosophical, and economic case for libertarianism because we just believe that principles matter. They're what's going to shift our society toward freedom.
Yep, I've been reading those articles for years, and I do highly recommend them, folks. And because I'm Italian, I have to say it this way. Go to fff.org, or I know who you are. I'll come and get you, okay? Okay, fine. Jacob, thank you so much for being on our... And we do hope that you will accept our invitation to return at a later date.
It would be a pleasure, and at the risk of incurring the ire of those who want English only, molte grazie, Joe.
Okay, thank you so much, Jacob. I'll be talking to you later. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye now. Oh, boy. Well, I guess that's a terrific program. I think he's a terrific guy.
Gotta be careful what I say.
Wow, that was too loud, wasn't it? This is the end of today's program. We'd like to thank our sponsors for the financial support, and we'd like to thank you for listening in. You can further the cause of liberty by recommending this program to your friends, but let us hear from you. Our email address is comments@libertytalkradio.com. Remember, folks, you're either allowing your liberties to be taken away or you're striving to protect them. Unfortunately, there is no middle ground. Until next time, this is Joe Cristiano. You've been listening to Liberty Talk Radio. Stay well. Stay tuned.